Today, I'm going to interview the geriatrician author of a new book about how to help aging parents. If you haven't watched before, welcome to The Wrinkle. I'm Dr. Nicole Diddick, an internist and geriatrician, so I have special certification in looking after older adults. Here on The Wrinkle, I try to give you advice so you can age better or help somebody to age better. But I'm not the only geriatrician who's turned to the internet to spread credible medical education about getting older. Dr. Leslie Kernesen is a geriatrician in San Francisco. She has gone to Princeton, Case Western Reserve Medical School, and the University of California, Berkeley School of Public Health. Practicing as a geriatrician and doing research in healthcare quality, she decided to turn her attention to writing and spreading medical education about aging well. Her website is called Better Health While Aging, and I highly recommend it. She has a Helping Older Parents membership where children, mostly, of older adults can sign up to get more personalized and specific advice about how to help their aging parents. I know from experience, my own experience looking after my parents, as well as working with countless caregivers who are looking after their parents, that it's not an easy journey. The start of the journey is what Dr. Kernisan wanted to focus on in writing her new book called When Your Aging Parent Starts Needing Help. It's a geriatrician's step-by-step guide to memory loss, resistance, safety concerns, and more. I found this book to be an amazing resource both as a geriatrician and a child of older parents. And I had the opportunity to sit down with Dr. Kernisan and talk about it. I hope you'll enjoy this interview, and I really hope you'll check out the book.
Thank you so much. That's great. Well, thank you. I'm really excited to be interviewing you. And, I have a feeling this is going to feel a lot more like just a conversation between colleagues because I was so excited to read your book, and I managed to snag an advance copy. And the book title is When Your Aging Parent Needs Help, a Geriatrician's Step-by-Step Guide to Memory Loss, Resistance, Safety Worries, and More. And the title alone got me kind of excited because, we know that there are millions of caregivers out there, and a lot of them are the children of aging parents. And there's very little practical advice that's from a credible source. So I thought this is going to be an amazing resource, and I read it with great interest. So because not only I'm a geriatrician, I have a practice in Canada, but a lot of the issues that we face are very similar to those in the US. And I'm also the child of aging parents. So this book was right up my alley. And so it's exciting to be able to talk about it today.
Thank you for reading it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it flew by. It was so practical. But why do you think this book is necessary? Who would you say that this book is written for?
Yeah. So, well, this book is written for people who are worried about an aging parent and are trying to figure out how to get in there and help. And I wrote it because, as you know, as a practicing geriatrician, our patients in principle are older adults, sometimes much older adults. And often we have families, pulling at our sleeve in the clinic or writing to us saying that they've gotten worried and they're trying to figure out how to help. And those are the older people who are lucky enough to already be in the care of a geriatrician. But this is something I've thought about a lot, how, as you know, families are often our partners, right, in caring for an older person, but that there's this point in the family's life where they realize that maybe they need to get involved, what I think of as the start of the journey. And it's something that people have often written to us about at Better Health While Aging, me and now you, because you've been helping me answer comments. So, we get a lot of those questions, right? I've gotten worried about my mom, but this and that is happening, but she's denying there's a problem or refusing my help. What do I do? So I knew it was a really common problem, and I wanted to help people navigate that first part where they need to get involved and they're so often just unsure of what to do. And we know that, as you were saying, families are partners to us and play this huge role in caring for older adults. But certainly in the States, they don't get a lot of like education and support on how to do it. They tend to just kind of figure it out as they go along. And I think it's especially hard at the beginning, where everything's so new. They're not, they're not ready for this. Their parent usually hasn't prepared them for this. Like, nobody's ready for making this transition. So I've thought about it a lot, and I felt like, we've addressed parts of it on Better Health While Aging, but that to give people like a step-by-step was more than I could write in an article, but that we could do it in a short book. And it is a short book, actually. I forget how many words it is, but it's shorter than most books. And so since I know that, I feel like ideally people would be able to get help. And so you've probably also heard this from people, that they often struggle to get help from their usual doctors. And they're not sure who to ask. And so I wanted to create something that would give them a little bit of a roadmap, because if they're not able to be your patient or my patient, where we can kind of walk them through this, I felt like the next best is, let me like explain to you sort of what I would be telling a family, and give you tools so that you can more effectively understand what's going on, what to look for, how to talk to your parents, what to ask for help from your usual health providers, from other sort of options for help with, social situations.
Yeah.
And, how to do this while respecting your parents' autonomy and dignity, and ideally like trying to protect that relationship, because this is often a huge stressor on the relationship between adult child and parent as well. So that's what, kind of led me to write it, was just, seeing so many people struggle, especially at this beginning part where they just have not at all gotten used to being involved, and there are all these new arenas that they're going to need to learn to navigate: healthcare for older adults, elder care, family dynamics shifting. So this was meant to be like a little contribution to help them get through it.
Well, I think it's a much needed contribution, because I don't think, and being a geriatrician too, like there's lots of times where people ask me about resources and, can I recommend a book or a guide or something, but there isn't really a lot that's written by a geriatrician, like even by a physician, let alone someone who's an expert in aging. So that really, I think, is what sets this book apart, and it's extremely practical. Like when you talk about tools and kind of almost simulating the geriatrician experience, like I felt like when I was reading it, I thought, it's almost like you're over the shoulder of the child, and you're saying, yes, try that, but it might go better if you try this, and then if it doesn't work, well, go to chapter 7, because that's where I tell you, how to pick up the pieces. So I think that's very valuable, because you're right. Unfortunately, everybody doesn't have access to quality geriatric medicine. And so this is a way of getting some of the important information if you don't have that resource, or even if you do, and you just, you need help and you want to get the most out of it. And I appreciate too that the book is divided up into a very easy to navigate kind of style. So maybe we should talk about that without giving away too much of the book.
I think we can give away as much as we want, because my feeling is that the more people have the information, the better. And then if they want the written out version with like the step-by-step, the book is there. And if not, that's fine too. So we can give away whatever you want.
Okay, because it is good to have the written book, because I know, like, I read it, and even doing things with my own parent, I have to say that I had to read it and try out the strategy, and then kind of go back and refer back and see, oh yeah, well maybe I didn't quite get their viewpoint the best way I could have, right? So it's good to have as a reference. But and I want to tell you more about that later. But let's just talk about how the book is divided up. So it's 3 parts, and the first one is taking stock, then taking aim, and then taking action. And like, as a geriatrician,
there is a 4th part afterwards, which I think is like getting ready for the longer haul.
Right. Digging in for the long haul. Because that's the other thing, is that I think a lot of people come into our office and they say, they kind of feel like, let's get this sorted out, and then they think they're going to leave and it'll be like, that's solved, like tick, don't have to worry
Yeah.
about mom anymore, but that's just not what happens. So
No.
yeah, there's kind
Yeah.
of the long haul,
But
taking
the
the long
first three
view.
are, I think, yeah, the most important
Yeah.
ones. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So people all usually want to go right to taking action though, don't they? Like, just tell me what to do, and
Exactly.
I'll do it. But why do you have to do those other steps first, the taking stock and taking
Well, I
aim?
think so. First of all, like the problems that people perceive as problems are often like a teeny piece of the problem or like the very sort of surface of it. But
Mm.
it's also, and I think it's something we do in geriatrics in general, is that, one of the things I love about geriatrics is that we usually step back and look at the bigger picture of
Mhm.
something and think about what's important to the person before we dive into a smaller piece. So some of it was about giving people a framework to apply that. But also, I think in general, like action that's not grounded in understanding the situation and understanding where you're trying to go is often not very effective, right? So
Mhm.
you need to have an understanding of where you're trying to get to. And for that, you need to learn more about why these kinds of problems come up for aging parents and what are the options. And then you also need to sort of like better understand what exactly is happening with your parents, not just in terms of the problems they're having, but how they see it and what's important to them. Um,
Mhm.
so the book was set up that way to, first of all, give people something specific and practical that they could go through, so that if they're worried about her cleaning or her driving, here are also other things that, and again, I modeled a lot of this on like, what do I do as a
Mm.
geriatrician, which is probably really similar to what you do, because as I often say, I don't think I'm exceptional as a geriatrician. We've been trained in ways to, assess and address common age-related challenges. And, so it was a lot about sort of spelling out, well, when people tell me I'm worried about the driving or the cleaning house or can they live alone, I look for all these specific things to really make sure I understand what might be happening to the person. And so that's part of the, taking stock. And then
Mhm.
we also, talk to our patients in depth to better understand how they see it before we move to action, because that understanding helps inform action that is likely to be a good fit with what's happening for the person, and a good fit with what they care about and what matters to them.
That is
Um,
so geriatrics, right? Like,
yeah, well,
and that's important. Like, in Better Health While Aging, I've heard you say many a time on your podcast, I'm going to, let's see if you can think like a geriatrician, or I'm going to teach you how to think like a geriatrician. But you're right. It's the nub of what matters. So
mm-hmm.
taking the time to figure out what's going on and what matters to your parent, you can craft a solution that they're going to accept instead of
Yeah.
just trying to force something that's going to be a non-starter.
Yeah, and I think
Mhm.
another thing that, is an idea in geriatrics that we work with a lot is that everything is connected to everything else,
Mm.
right?
Yeah, house of
So,
cards.
right. So it's kind of like, okay, well, before you go chasing down this thing, let's take a comprehensive look at things,
Mhm.
and see, because they're probably all connected. So that was the idea behind taking stock. And so
Mhm.
it wasn't just like, here's a list of signs your parent needs help or symptoms that you should report to the health provider, although I definitely included that.
Mhm.
But it was also then, before you go off trying to do something, it's also like, having a conversation with your parent, not just to tell them what you think should change or tell them what the problems are. Actually, early on, I recommend not doing that, but more to
Mm.
sort of like really listen and understand, like, how are they seeing this situation? Because even if they say things that seem completely crazy to you, that's to see how their view of it is different from yours is really important information. And if it
Yeah,
seems completely not grounded in reality, that's useful information for everybody too, right?
that is too, right?
Like
That does
you and
come
I
up.
would
And
like
yeah.
be interested in that
Mm.
information. And also
Mm.
because when we do that, we generate more connection with the
Yeah.
person, and they feel more likely to listen to our advice, or we can
Mhm.
frame the recommendations we're going to make later as ways to help them get something that they said they wanted and was
Mm.
important to them. So that was another part that I felt was important. So there's kind of learning about your parents' situation, and values.
Mm-hmm.
And then the taking aim part was about helping people understand, like, usually what would we want to do and why. So they could have an understanding of what would be the steps that often we as geriatricians or as geriatric care managers, because I do want to speak to our colleagues, right, who we work with
Right.
ideally closely,
Mm-hmm.
social workers or nurses or people who can sort of assess the living situation, the care needs, negotiating kind of like what might support the person in whatever they're struggling with. I wanted to give people a sense of how we usually looked into what people need, why, and how we might help, so that later as they make their plan, they know what they're hoping to get towards.
And that makes total sense, because if you don't know what your goal is, you won't sort of know when you've got there, right? Or if you should just keep spinning your wheels or throwing more money at it or hiring somebody else. I mean, no, you know, and you have to set realistic goals.
Yeah.
It's just such a universal thing, right? Like if anything you're trying to achieve, you have to set those goals and they have to be achievable. Then you have to see where you're at. But so I appreciate that. And the book is so practical. And so just to go back to the taking stock for a second, when one of the things I really loved was how in the book you talk about using the other sources of data and how to, so you talk to your parent, and there's amazing advice there about really practical communication strategies.
And there,
you know?
I should have mentioned this sooner, but I have to give a lot of credit for that to my co-author,
Right.
Paula Spencer-Scott, because I did not write this book by myself. I wrote it with Paula, who is a dear friend and longtime writing colleague. When I first started writing for the public about problems with aging parents, that was for a website called caring.com in 2008, and Paula was one of the writers, and she was my editor. And so she helped me become a better writer for the public, but she's also a published author, a journalist, and who used to write about parenting and families, and now has written more about elder care. So she really helped craft those sentences of things to say and things to not say based on her previous work. And then she's also gone, you know, through this journey with her parents and, you know, parents-in-law as well. So yes, I was excited to be able to tell people, not just listen more attentively and respectfully, but to really give them, you know, specific examples of what tends to go over well and what is often counterproductive and creates more conflict.
Yes, so exactly. And it's really spelled out. So you don't just say, here's how to say it. There's actual script in there that a person could use. And, you know, you can change it so that it sounds more like you're saying it. But those phrases were great. Like, you know, and I kind of wish I had a cheat sheet like that for other areas of my life too, right? Like for my parenting or, you know, with your marriage. Like there's got to be, when you have the way of saying things, there's a way to say it that is going to get the, you know, the information you want, and there's a way that'll shut it down. Yes. So that's really great that it is so practical, and that's wonderful that Paula was able to help, you know, to co-write that section. And we should tell people what the cheat sheets are. They're actual downloadable papers, like, you know, documents that you could print off and use and, you know, edit and change around, and you can and they're throughout the book. So that's a great resource too. It's not just a book, it's got practical, you know, it's got little handbooky things that you can use.
Yeah, I mean Paula co-wrote the whole book, but she has always had a really kind of practical style in her books and writing. That's part of why we like working together, because that's my inclination too. And so in every chapter, we sort of tell people what we recommend, and then we have like a section called Tool where we kind of spell out how to do it. And then what we did is that for each of those practical sections, for most of them, we have created a complimentary downloadable PDF version. People who buy the book will be able to go to a link and enter information and then get these printables. Because the book itself is otherwise going to be, I think, you know, 6 by 9. And so, you know, there's the practical information in there, but we thought that some people might also enjoy having, something printable that they could reference right before they have the conversation with their parent, or use to make sure they've collected all the signs that there might really be something wrong with memory or thinking. So, so we have those tools in the book. And then the other thing, which I'm sure you saw also, is that for each, we also created two families to follow throughout the book.
Yeah, the real life stories.
Yeah, two families. And so in every chapter, at the end of the chapter, we have what this looks like. And so first one family and then the other, implementing the steps in that specific chapter. Because when we thought about it, I just felt like I find it always so helpful when people show me like a few specific examples. Like, here's what it might look like. That just like gets my juices going of like, oh, here's how I might do it for my situation. And so I really wanted that to be a book.
Yeah, I love that, actually, the real life stories. And they're really well done, because they seem really true to life, like based on my experience as a geriatrician. I've seen people that have gone through that. One of the caregivers is the out of town son, caring for a dad, and the other is the daughter who lives nearby and caring for the mom. And they have different sort of challenges, but there's the common theme of trying to help. And these are not the ideal situations, for sure. And that's something that you touch on early on in the book, is like, the ideal is what we're going to talk about, what could ideally happen, but then we'll also talk about what's likely to realistically happen.
Right.
So I think getting that straight in your head early on as a caregiver kind of helps you to frame your expectations. And then reading those family stories, you can say, okay, well, gosh, Zeke is doing his best, and so am I. And, he didn't have a perfect outcome, and he did, all these things right. But there's always some success. And so that's another thing I liked is giving, and this is near the end, the digging in for the long haul. You sort of say, reflect on your successes, right? Like, think about what has gone right, because even if you feel like there's a fail, so, thinking about my own experience, encouraging my parents to hire help, so I did what I thought they wanted, and kind of got an agency, got a helper. I thought it was a good fit. And after, 3 days, no, it wasn't a good fit because of this, and this, so, okay, that didn't work, but then they were able to hire their own help that they sort of found through another route. So, and they're having the person come in, 1/3 as often as what I think is right, but at least they've taken that step. It's a big step, because they've never had in-home help before, right? So that's a start. That's a small win. And I think that was like a result that I got out of the book, because otherwise I would have thought, I probably would have felt like, well, that's a fail. Like, clearly this, this is terrible. But reading the book, I thought, okay, well, yes, there's that success, and I was able to go back and talk to them too, in a way that I explored, like, why didn't that work out? Like, tell me more. I said some of those phrases. I said, tell me more about that. Okay, so what I'm hearing is your privacy is really important.
Yeah.
And even though you can afford it, you want to balance your budget in this way. So, so that was like, just to share my experience with it, that was something that I was able to reflect and say, okay, we had that success there. And so documenting that, being aware of that, I think was very helpful. So it helped me to feel better, and to have more energy to keep going, which is what you need.
I think there you're bringing up so many important things. I mean, first of all, you as a geriatrician are actually an expert in this. And I think, we sometimes forget that even when we're experts ourselves, when it happens to us, it's different. And so having something that reminds us of the little steps that are just so easy to overlook, even if you are an expert and actually know it, just in the moment, is really helpful. And I think also that people often feel like, this is so hard, I must be doing it wrong. Or I'm not getting what I wanted for them, the answers, the safety, the cooperation, there's something wrong, right? There's something, I'm doing something wrong, or there's something wrong. And I wanted people to feel reassured that, in a way, there's something wrong in that it's wrong that in our society, it's still so hard for so many people to go through this journey that's incredibly common. right? I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
I think it's wrong that as a society, we don't have better supports available to help people through this, but we don't. And so what I
Yeah.
wanted, people to understand is that it's common for this to be really hard because unfortunately, we don't have enough social workers who are trained in helping older adults and their families navigate this. We don't have enough health providers who are trained in this. In fact, often the health providers end up being, another obstacle that you kind of have to overcome or manage.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so if you're there thinking like, this is so hard, I want to give people empathy and say, I know, I'm sorry. I wish it were different, but it's not you. You're not missing something easy.
Yes. Yeah.
It's just like the
Yeah.
nature of this is that as a society, we have not invested in creating, the teams to be there to help families through this. So you are going to have to go through it. It is common for it to take several conversations with your parent, several tries talking to the doctor, several tries sometimes talking to your siblings. And that's just how it is. So it doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. Here's some guidance to help you know like where to expend your energy and also give yourself some grace. Like little steps will eventually get you there. We also try to emphasize that, as an adult child, I think, and this, we see a lot of guilt and a
Oh,
lot of
yeah.
people taking on so much responsibility. They really want to make the situation perfect for their parent. They want all these changes and they want their parent to be happy. And, so we also in the book tried to reiterate that you can't make this usually totally right, certainly not quickly. And that it's not necessarily your job to. You should show up and try to help and offer help, and it may or may not be accepted or maybe not right away. We also talk about, some guidance on when to know whether you should be a little bit more forceful in intervening because that does come up, but that, just showing up and trying to help is often a large part of it. So we try to provide people with a little bit of comfort and reassurance.
Oh, yeah.
But is often, a long journey that is hard.
Yeah, that really does come across. Like it's written from I think it's done so well. Like the book, it's because it's hard to balance that, right? Like I think you can read this, like it's sort of aimed for the adult child who's looking after the older parent. It's very empathetic that way, but it's also incredibly respectful of the older adult, right? So it kind of, in a really nice way, it says, hey, child of an aging parent, check yourself. Like, is this you? It's me versus them. And that's a tool that you mentioned, right? Like,
right.
is this your goal or is it your parents' goal? So that's hard to do.
Are you trying to get them to do stuff to like meet your own needs for knowing they did everything right? Yeah.
Yeah. So that's hard to do that, like with empathy, right? To say, hey, listen, you might need to, respect your parent in a different way than you thought you were, or help them, you're going to have to accept that they might want to live with risk. That's something that you bring up many times in the book, is that if we think about what the child wants, it's like you mentioned, comfort, they want the parent to be happy. They want to not get 200 phone calls a day, they
want maximum safety.
Yeah, totally safe. Control. Never falls. I can go on my vacation to Hawaii and not worry about them,
right. Exactly.
But the parent probably wants a lot more autonomy, they might value the independence, the privacy, being able to see the family and the friends. Like, even let's look at the situation with COVID, right? Some people might say, I want to see my grandchild. I'm willing to accept that they might expose me to COVID, because their value might be different than what we would project on the person. So so that's an interesting balance that this book strikes, I think, is between the parent and the child, because it really emphasizes the relationship. Like you've said, like this is what you can do to get the result you want, but in the end, a lot of it is going to be about the relationship that you have with your parent, and preserving that, or trying to even deepen that, right, as you're going on this journey. So
but again, I think I'm channeling the things that we do as geriatricians, right? The trade-off between, in geriatrics, if you end up in geriatrics, you've, been willing to provide medical care to people where often there's no cure, there's no fix, right? We
Yeah.
help our patients and their families consider trade-offs, and pick a way forward in, situations where none of the options are what we would have chosen in a perfect world. So the book is, again, just, I think, trying to bring more of that geriatrics approach, and make it accessible to more people, even if they're not able to get, a lot of care from a geriatrician or a geriatric care manager.
Absolutely. So let's go back to the book then. So we've gone through taking stock, taking aim, and a big part of taking aim, or one thing that I thought was very valuable, was getting the medical assessment and then going to the medical assessment. So this is a high stakes kind of thing, right? Like this oftentimes there's a long wait to get to the person, to get to the right person, and then there's this visit. So do you think that many people are unprepared for these visits?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, first, sometimes families don't realize that they really should get involved in that medical evaluation, right? So they sort of leave their older parent to go or motivate on their own and tell them. And especially if there have been concerns about memory problems or thinking problems that, may not be right. And then I think just people start off kind of assuming the healthcare system will take care of a lot more than it does, right? They assume that the doctor will notice that their parent is having all these problems and will be able to get the information they need just from a short visit with their parents. And in fact, it's, that's often not the case. And even you and I, actually, even if we're attuned to it, we can have difficulty getting the information we need, because if an older person's been forgetful or is worried about disclosing some problems they've been having, because they may understandably be worried that we're going to then advise that they change their life in a way that they often don't want to do, right? Or feel deep ambivalence about doing, they may not be entirely forthcoming. So I think people just, unless they've already had a lot of experience with the healthcare system and with these kinds of problems, can underestimate the degree to which they're going to need to be proactive and advocate. And then there's also the fact that many primary care providers just aren't equipped to, they seem to have difficulty being very helpful. And I think, sometimes it's lack of training or experience or comfort with looking into this. And I think some of it is just lack of time. And that certainly in the States, we often put them in a position where they have, short visits and are under a lot of pressure, and that doesn't put them in a good position to explore something that's more challenging and, messy like this. So I wanted people to be, to kind of understand what was likely to happen and start thinking about how they can work around it, because they are still going to usually have to work with their parents' usual doctors.
Yeah, that's true.
And it may take a few tries also to either get an older parent to the doctor or get the doctor to communicate. And so we, I wanted to illustrate, ideally what it would look like, and then also talk about the ways that it often doesn't go quite right, and give people some specific,
you do that.
Suggestions for how to get around those.
Yeah, and you do that very well. I mean, that's, unfortunately, that is a scenario, right? That we see that the person, the family physician or whatever, the practitioner might be dismissive. And there's some ageism there too. I think it's probably true that some people think it is normal aging to have some of those problems that might be reported. And so I really appreciated that in the book, you go through, well, if they say this, like, you could counter politely, by saying, well, how do you explain these symptoms? Like, what would be another explanation for this? What other tests could we have? Or things like that. So there's very, very helpful kind of cheat sheet there for things that you could say or ask for. And then it also covers when to ask for a second opinion or a referral, which I think is, what a lot of people want to know, like, when is it reasonable to be getting the script to do that, to do the advocacy in a polite way, but one that's likely to get results and maintain the relationship with the doctor. Because it's
because
probably
you need that
ongoing.
person usually as an ally.
We've alluded to this a few times, but we've mentioned dementia. And that's often a very important piece, not always, but in helping an older adult, right? So, what, and that's often where people come in and say they're meeting so much resistance, you know, or the mom is in denial or something. Like, as a geriatrician, when do we think about dementia as a cause for some of these conflicts with the older parent?
Yeah. Well, so I'm not sure what your practice is, but for me, whenever an older child complains about their parent not wanting to do this and being worried and resisting, I always start off thinking, could there be a memory or thinking issue there? Partly because if it is, you know, we want to think about how to help, but also because I think, you know, as an adult child, if you're thinking, should I get involved and push them to do something that they don't want to do? It's really important, this question of capacity, right? Of mental capacity, because people have the right to make their own decisions unless they've become mentally impaired and can no longer clearly understand the decision and the consequences of making one choice or another. So that's the other reason, because if your older parent has mental capacity and is just making choices you don't like, you know, refusing to go to the doctor, choosing to live in a 3-story house with tons of stairs and all that, but if they are, you know, for the most part, like mentally clear enough, then you can be worried. You can try to persuade them to consider other alternatives, and you really are supposed to accept that they get to decide things that you don't like. But if they are impaired, and a cause of this kind of impairment in aging adults, especially once they get into, you know, their later 80s and 90s, is that they are mentally slipping, then the calculus becomes a little different, right?
Right.
Because they clearly are still expressing this preference to maintain their autonomy and take risks, but they also don't understand it in quite the same way. And also, at some point, they're likely just to need care and supervision, even if they don't want it. So I think, you know, that question of, is their memory and thinking impaired? And if it is it a permanent condition, which we would describe as, you know, dementia, a syndrome of having developed memory and thinking problems that are chronic and that are bad enough that your daily life functions are impaired. And as you know, Alzheimer's is the most common underlying cause of dementia, but there are some other ones. And I felt that this, you know, not everybody who's worried about an aging parent who's maybe having some safety issues or problem at home, not all of those older adults are having memory or thinking problems or have dementia, but I felt that I wanted to give people the guidance on how to know if they really should be worried and how that should get evaluated. And I think it's often a very hard time for people when there's this uncertainty and they have not yet gotten an evaluation or a diagnosis. And then another thing that we speak to in the book is that a certain number of people will be in this gray area that might be the very earliest stages of dementia. And that's really difficult for everybody involved. And their ability to make decisions might be kind of borderline too, right? Their ability to drive might be borderline. And just the nature of that kind of condition that slowly progresses is that, you know, most people will spend a certain period of time in this gray area stage, and it's really uncomfortable and difficult for families. I mean, it makes me uncomfortable as a provider too, right? And probably you. You know, we have people where we're like, oh, I think they're kind of, you know, slipping, or they're impaired, but they can still kind of take care of their meds, kind of take, you know, and it's not yet significant enough that one can really override them. And so I wanted to help people understand too that that's a common stage, and that they might, you know, after evaluation find that that's where they're at for the time being. So, yeah.
No, I agree. And I think that's done really well in the book too. Like, and you do give some sort of checklists about, and it is very much about the function, because you're right. Like, you can have changes in memory, but if it's not affecting function, then it's probably not dementia. It could be, but if there has to be, like,
or not yet.
Not yet, or not, like, you know, you wouldn't have, if you have nothing wrong in that sort of function checklist, you know, chances are it's not. But
maybe you can give a few examples of what you look at when you're thinking about function. I want to make sure everybody understands what we mean by function.
Yeah, no, you know what? That's a great point. So and that's why we're very nosy too, right? And sometimes you have to ask a few different sources, but it is things like a person's driving skills. You know, did they go out to get milk and come back 3 hours later? You know, or did you get a call from the police that they're 2 towns over and, you know, ran out of gas on the side of the road?
Yeah. What
That
do
would
they
be an
need help
obvious.
with?
Yes,
What is
yeah.
it that they now
Bills.
are having trouble doing that they could do
Mhm.
before, like organizing a
Yeah,
meal, the
yeah.
grocery shopping, right?
Medications. And
Medications.
finances is often an early one too, like just
Finances
sort
is
of,
definitely an early one, you
yeah.
know,
So
or
those
later
things,
getting dressed, right?
yeah,
Getting to from
yeah,
the bathroom. Yeah, that's what we
yeah.
mean when we say function.
Recognizing. Yes. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So that's where and so dementia does affect those, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it starts with those higher things like driving and banking and shopping and finances, and then it progresses to the more sort of basic things.
Yeah,
But just because a person has a diagnosis of dementia, it doesn't necessarily mean they're not capable,
right.
like you say, you know. And you mentioned that, and I think the book does a good job too of clearly talking about the basics of what you kind of need to know about privacy and power of attorney and
Mm-hmm.
capacity. You know,
Mm-hmm.
that's a thing that we get lots of comments on, I know, on the website. You know, almost
Mm-hmm.
every week there's questions about capacity and privacy and can I see this and can I do that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, just because you get a diagnosis of dementia doesn't mean you're automatically incapable. So I like how the book kind of tells you, you know, talks about how complex it is and how you know, you might not be able to just take over even if you have power of attorney. Once you get that diagnosis, it doesn't mean that you can now, you know, take control of your mom's life.
No, it doesn't.
So you make it really clear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So that's really well done. That's taking aim. So figuring out where do I need to focus my energy, as you say, and then we get to taking action. So we've
Mm-hmm.
alluded to some of those things where, you know, you're doing things and then seeing how they pan out. But one thing I really liked was that in the book, you mentioned this approach that is kind of 5 steps.
Mm-hmm.
And it's A, B, C, D, E. So it's got
Mm-hmm.
like a really easy to remember acronym, which we
Yes,
love.
Paula came up with that one.
Oh, it's so good. No, it's really good. And it's like, it's this iterative thing. So A is
It's assess,
assess,
brainstorm,
brainstorm,
choose,
make a choice.
do,
Yeah.
and experiments.
Experiment.
Yeah.
Right. So tell me more about that approach.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think one of the challenges in creating a resource for people helping, you know, who are worried about an aging parent and trying to, you know, the problem with like, let me tell you what to do is that, of course, there's an enormous amount of variability in the family's like situation, right? The specific problems they're having, the older parents' preferences, what are the, you know, financial possibilities, the care options, who's available and in what way to assist, you know, whether that's the provider, whether the provider is very involved and accessible or there's no provider, you know, who are the family members involved. And so what we tried to do is give people a framework so that they could then take everything they'd learned about their specific situation, their parents, and on what we kind of taught them about, here's how ideally it would work, and then kind of plug it in together to come up with a plan for what they would attempt to do next. And we kind of envisioned over the next 1 to 3 months. So, you know, and we made a worksheet for it too. So assess was, you know, to help them go back over what they'd learned, were the specific things their parent was struggling with, what kind of evaluation their parent had already had, if they'd been able to find that out, what their parent was amenable to, what their parent cared about, whether they thought there were memory problems or not, whether they thought capacity might be an issue. And then, you know, looking at what's been done and reviewing our list of here's what ideally would happen, it's then kind of like brainstorming, so what are some things we could do next? And in the book, we do say, you know, that often, not always, but often what people want to do next is pursue that medical evaluation. So if an older person is declining or having difficulty, we want to understand why, because the why affects what we're going to do about it and how we would help. Because it's often, as you said, it's more about just getting somebody in to clean. You know?
Yeah, yeah.
Why are they having difficulty difficulty cleaning? If they're having
Yeah.
difficulty cleaning, are they having difficulty with other things? What does this mean?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
what kind of other help
Mm-hmm.
might they need now? And what does this mean for what your family needs to know about what to plan for over the next 6 to 12 months and maybe for years afterwards?
Yeah.
So often getting more of that medical evaluation is important, and taking steps to kind of shore up the older person's living or safety situation. You know,
Mm-hmm.
those are often things that people want to do next, or just working on getting them to accept more help.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so but we tried to create kind of a worksheet where people could then, you know, make a list of all the things they could do, and usually there'll be a lot of them, right? So
Mm-hmm.
probably have this happen too. When we first do our evaluation, like our list of everything that could be done to help the older person for next steps is like, mine is like this long, right? And it's overwhelming for everybody. So
Yes.
I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, here's, you know, but it's really like, okay, let's pick 1 to 3 max
Yeah.
to try
Pick
to
our
work
battles
on,
here.
and
Yeah.
everything else you're going to have to set aside for right now, because it's just
Mm-hmm.
not, it's not doable for us as providers, for the family. The older person is going to get overwhelmed if you try to address sort of 20 things. So that would be the choose part, and then kind of really kind of planning out a few next steps.
Mm-hmm.
And then we do emphasize that generally you're going to come up with this idea of talking to your parent or the doctor or this, and that you should really be prepared to have to try to do it a few times. Because
Yes.
that's just the
Yeah.
nature of how it goes. That if you
Yeah.
go in expecting that you're going to have one conversation, you're going to get the connection, the understanding, the acceptance, and everything is going to fall into place.
Mm-hmm.
I think it happens once in a blue moon for some lucky family, but most of the time.
Yeah.
So that's the D, the doing. You know, go try to do something, and then E, expect to have to experiment with it. You know, a little bit. So you
Yeah.
have a first conversation with the doctor, or attempt to get them to help. And if it doesn't quite work out the way you were hoping, which is what I would recommend people expect, hope for the best, expect the
Mm-hmm.
likely,
Yeah.
then you're going to try a slightly different angle and just, try it a few times. And it's
Mm-hmm.
hard in that adult children usually are trying to sort this out with their parent while they are juggling lots of other obligations, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Years,
Yeah.
children at home. I mean, you've been talking about your older parents, but you also have children at home that you're,
I
helping, because
do.
it's just
I have
that
4
stage
teenagers.
of life. There we go,
Yeah.
right? Plus your own career as a geriatrician,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
Husband, dog.
exactly, right?
Yeah. Friends.
Some
Yeah.
people are juggling their own like health issues or other life
Yes.
issues as well. So in a way, I feel bad telling people, be ready to try it this several times. But I
Mm-hmm.
felt like, well, I want people to have a realistic understanding,
Yeah.
you know?
Oh, that's
And
really well
although I
done.
don't want to discourage them by saying, I'm sorry, you might have to try this a few times. I want them to be ready for that. And also to think, well, how can I pace myself? How can
Mm-hmm.
I take care of myself? And also, please don't beat yourself up if the first time you talked to the doctor or your parent, it didn't work out magically right away.
Mm-hmm.
It's not you.
Yeah.
It's the nature of how this goes.
Yeah.
And so that was our, our ABCDE formula. And then we did
Yeah.
create a worksheet to go with it if people want to, a little bit of help figuring out, okay, what am I going to try to do over the next, 1 to 2 months to help address my parents' situation.
I think that's so good. And that really did come across that, like, this, it's just, that's the balance again that was struck in this book, is that the encouragement to try, the practical tools to try, but acknowledging that it's that you're dealing with human systems, right? And so you're going to have challenges, but then you also present workarounds, right? Like, if this didn't work, try this. And some of those workarounds are things that I do recommend in my office, including, so you mentioned there's a lot in the book about how to enlist the help of siblings, how to enlist the help of other professionals, and other allies. And then you also mentioned using fiblets sometimes. So, and that can range from sort of framing things in a way that, is you're reframing it to be something that the parent's going to like more, to outright kind of lying, but with a good intent. So
yes. Well, I always want to be a little careful about that one. But yes, it's, you know, and it should only be considered if you really think somebody is having memory or thinking problems to the point that they
Right.
truly cannot understand.
Right.
And ideally that would have been confirmed by an expert. But that is, you know, one of the things that geriatric care managers and other elder care experts often, you know, recommend families try is that you don't have to necessarily tell the entire truth. Now, this can be ethically fraught and potentially
Yeah.
legally a little bit tricky, but it is, you know,
Mhm.
something to consider and that I at least want people to know about. But yes, in writing the obstacles section, I mean, I am indebted to not only the families that I've worked with in person, but all the people, again, who have written to Better Health While Aging over the years. And then, as you know, I've also been offering, you know, various online Helping Older Parents programs for the last 2
Mhm.
years. It started with a boot camp program in 2018. In 2019 and 2020, we've been doing an online membership, which is kind of similar. We're reworking that for 2021. But, you know,
Mhm.
we do hear from people like what the stuck spots are. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
so the book, I'm just like so grateful to all the older adults and their families who I've interacted with online and in person for bringing those up. And then also in our membership, we've had 3 geriatric care managers, and I've also learned from other geriatric care managers that I've worked with, but they often have more like on the ground knowledge of how to troubleshoot some of these things. And so we
Mhm.
built that into the book as well. So so yes, we've been taking action. We help people make a plan, A, B, C, D, E. But then the next chapter is like common obstacles and what you can try. Where does it often go wrong? And we came up
Yeah.
with a list and picked the most common ones and then offered our suggestions for things that people could try or ask about or consider and think about, you know, could this work for my situation?
Yeah, no, and I think that's good. And again, I think this is the way the book is laid out and the content of it is such that I think people will skip back and forth between different sections, depending on where they are in their
Mm-hmm.
journey and where those, what you call them, sucky spots or, you know, little pinch
Stuck
points
spots.
are. Yeah, the the stuck spots. So depending on where you are, you can move, you know, back and forth between the modules. And that's one thing about the course too. The Helping Older Parents membership has kind of a course with modules that cover a lot of the same content, but they have different sort of areas of focus. And I found that you know, going through the course, I would sometimes want to skip back and forth between the
Mm-hmm.
different modules. So that's, I really appreciate the layout of the book because it's really, it is like a handbook. It's a handbook,
Yeah.
you know, for aging parents.
Well, the
So
book was, yeah, the book
marvelous.
I really thought of as like the step by step, especially if you were either getting started, like new to
Mm-hmm.
this, like getting involved in your older parents' health, life, care, you know, whatever. Or even if you've already been involved, if you felt like you had to kind of rethink how that involvement was or a particular problem. I felt like it could be helpful for that, really actionable. And yes, the course, you know, pre-existing course, I'm thinking of redoing somewhat, but that because the course covered a few other like big picture geriatrics issues and got, I think, a little bit more into the ongoing journey of helping
Mm-hmm.
a parent with housing, care, and you know, navigating the sort of overall chronic care conditions, end of life. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I just feel like most people can't work with us. And so, you know, can we help them by teaching them so that they have a little bit better foundation? Um, and they're still going to have to do the work of, you know,
Yeah.
accompanying their aging parent on this journey. And even when you kind of know what could happen, I mean, as you've experienced, right? It's hard when it's you
Oh,
because
yeah.
these are, you know, close relationships
Mhm.
and they just bring up our own worries and we want the best for our older parents and we also want to get along better with them and everybody else and so I can't pretend to make this easy, but you know my hope was that through Better Health While Aging and these Helping Older Parents programs and now this book, which is, you know, a piece of it, is to make it a little easier.
Yeah. And when we started this discussion, you said, well, I'm just an average geriatrician, I don't have any special magic. But I beg to differ. I mean, I think you do, because I think that as you say, there aren't enough geriatricians. And so to have one um, with your ability to take this information and to translate it and communicate it, that's exceptional, because we geriatricians are pretty good, but no, honestly, to be able to really, like I say, it's like you're over the shoulder of the person, with empathy, but also with some practical advice and some, no sugarcoating, keeping it real. To be able to do that, it is a tremendous talent. So
Oh,
I
well,
think you are pretty special.
well, thank you.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
in geriatrics, well, I guess in medicine, many of us like to teach, right? We like to teach
Mm-hmm.
our patients, our families, or we teach medical students and residents,
Mm-hmm.
which I think you've done in the past.
Yeah.
I always really took to heart this idea that the most important member of the healthcare team is the patient and family.
Yeah.
And so we in geriatrics have learned so much about how to help older adults through common age-related health challenges so that they can have better well-being and quality of life, and so that the care can be a better fit for what matters to them, and not
Hmm.
only address longevity, but also their living situation and their independence. Those are things we know as geriatricians. And so this idea of how can we help more regular people access that? How can we teach people that? And then I've benefited a lot from working with people like Paula, who helped me make the writing better and just sort of doing it a lot. But you also have gone into this, and you have a talent for doing it on video
Thank you.
that I don't have at all.
It's
So
fun.
it's been fun to collaborate with you, because I do really think that it's important, for us to be providing more information and support to families who are on that journey. But yes, the specifics of what I do as a geriatrician, like the diagnoses I think about and how I talk to people, in person, I think, hopefully I do it as well as you do and as my other geriatrician colleagues do, so.
Well, I've a lot. Thank you. I think you're special too. But
Oh,
geriatricians as a breed are quite. They're all quite good. I can't think of too many bad ones.
No. Well, we chose to go into this, so there's something
Yeah.
that drew us to it. So,
Yeah.
well, thank you once
Great.
again
Yeah.
for reading it and for helping me get the word out about it, and also for your contributions actually to better health while aging, in responding to comments and being a fellow traveler with me on this road of like, let's share geriatrics online. So
It's been wonderful.
that has meant a lot to me.
Yeah, well, thank you. I just want to share that I read this book, as I said before, I read it as a geriatrician, but also as a child who's helping aging parents. And it had so much value to me in both of those realms, because I think the book just really balances the respect of the older adult, the autonomy and the independence, but it really captures that struggle of trying to help your parent and just feeling wholly inadequate to the task. So it was comforting, but it was also very practical.
Did you feel more adequate after you read it? Or did you remember that in fact you are doing enough when you're adequate?
And those words rang in my head many times, that you're doing enough, what you're doing is good enough. And you're doing your best and you're doing all that you can do. So those words and those little aphorisms really did stay with me. And I think this book is a fabulous guide to having a more fulfilling relationship with your parent as they age, because that's, as you mentioned, you're not always going to get to the successful outcome the first time or maybe any time, but you can, going through the process that you describe in the book, you can deepen that relationship with your parent. I wish all my patients' families would read it. And I'm so glad that I did, because
it will be
really
out soon. So
okay.
yes, so we will post a link.
Okay.
Very soon, but we're hoping to get it available for pre-order on Amazon soon.
Excellent.
It'll be available as an ebook, but also in print for those who want it. And then we're still ironing out the exact release date. It'll be early in 2021. But I'm working out the details. We are hoping people will pre-order it because that helps Amazon and other printers know to print enough copies. And probably I'll be doing a couple special Q&As or other activities for people who sign up for the pre-order. So it is, I think somewhat US specific, but of course, hopefully it will be helpful to people in Canada as well.
Oh yeah, I think it would be. And I think you need to put me down for at least 12 copies so that I can share them with all my colleagues and then maybe start giving them out to families. Maybe before they come for their visit, we'll send them a copy.
Right. Or eventually
they might cancel.
You'll do the Canadian edition.
Yes, yeah, I'd love to. That would be a privilege.
So.
Yeah, okay, so we should watch out for those announcements. And maybe if people want to hop on the mailing list to make sure that they don't miss that.
That is definitely a good way. Yeah, we have an interest list and we'll post a link to where people can sign up for updates. And then otherwise, of course, at Better Health While Aging, we love to have people follow along, whether they're families or older adults interested in their own health. And we always recommend that people also follow Dr. Didick of The Wrinkle because she creates lots of short videos, which also can be a great resource for lots of topics. So, okay. Well, thank you again, Dr. Nicole.
Always
it's a pleasure to talk to you. And thank you also for helping me co-host the Better Health While Aging podcast.